What happens when the golden voice of Motown, the radiant Tammi Terrell, suddenly collapses mid-song into Marvin Gaye's arms, and the world realizes that joy itself has a breaking point? October 14, 1967, Hampton-Sydney College. A packed auditorium hears her laughter fade, her high notes stumble, and then silence. In that moment, America didn't just watch a singer fall. They watched an entire dream of eternal youth, harmony, and love slip into the shadow of mortality. The image burned into 1,000 memories, Marvin Gaye, mid-performance, catching Tammi as she crumpled. Her sequined dress catching stage lights one last time before the curtain fell. 22 years old, at the peak of her powers, the woman whose crystalline voice had lifted millions suddenly couldn't lift herself. In the ambulance racing through Virginia darkness, doctors discovered what had been growing silently behind those bright eyes. A mass that would steal away the most radiant voice of her generation, note by note, breath by breath. But this wasn't just a medical emergency. This was the beginning of the end for a partnership that had redefined what music could mean, what two voices could create when they found perfect harmony. Within 3 years, Tammi Terrell would be gone, leaving behind a Marvin Gaye so shattered he would never sing the same way again, and a catalog of songs that proved joy could echo longer than the lives that created it. Who was the woman behind that golden timbre? What darkness had she been carrying even before the tumor began its cruel work? And why would her death transform American music itself, turning Marvin from a crooner of love songs into the tortured artist who would create What's Going On? To understand how the light went out, we must first understand how brilliantly it burned. Philadelphia, April 29th, 1945. While soldiers returned from a world at war, a different kind of victory was beginning in a modest row house on Diamond Street, where Jenny and Rufus Montgomery welcomed Thomasina Winifred into a world that had no idea it was about to be blessed with a voice that could heal hearts and move mountains. Born into a family where gospel wasn't just religion but survival, baby Tommy entered life with lungs that seemed designed for more than breathing. They were instruments waiting to transform pain into beauty. The Montgomery household wasn't wealthy. Rufus worked double shifts at the Philadelphia Naval Yard while Jenny cleaned houses for white families in suburban neighborhoods. But it was cathedral-rich with sound. Their cramped living room became a sanctuary where music served as both escape and affirmation. Jenny, exhausted from days spent scrubbing other people's floors, would return each evening to fill their small space with hymns that made the walls themselves seem to vibrate with divine presence. Young Tommy would climb onto furniture to reach the battered upright piano that dominated their front room, a gift from Jenny's mother, who had recognized something special in her granddaughter's voice before the child could even speak properly. Her tiny fingers would pick out melodies by ear while her voice soared above neighborhood noise like something heaven sent, causing neighbors to pause their evening routines just to listen. The transformation from household entertainment to spiritual phenomenon began when Tommy was just 4 years old. During a particularly rousing family sing-along, she began harmonizing in ways that shouldn't have been possible for someone so young. Jenny would later describe the moment. It was like watching an angel remember how to use its wings. Tommy wasn't learning to sing. She was remembering something she already knew. By age 6, Tammy was commanding the choir at New Jerusalem Baptist Church, her voice carrying such power that grown congregants would weep during her solos. Pastor Williams, a man who had witnessed decades of church performances, would later recall, "That child didn't just sing hymns. She channeled something beyond this world." When Thomasina opened her mouth, you could feel every broken heart in that sanctuary start to mend. The church became her first stage, and the congregation her first audience to experience what would become known as the Tommy effect. the inexplicable ability to make listeners feel simultaneously comforted and uplifted, as if her voice carried healing properties that transcended mere entertainment. Sunday services began drawing visitors from other churches, people who came specifically to hear the little girl who could make even the most cynical souls believe in redemption. But even as a child, contradictions defined her existence. On stage, she blazed with confidence that seemed to radiate from her very soul, commanding attention with the authority of someone born to perform. Off stage, she was fragile, almost transparent, seeking approval with an intensity that worried those who loved her. Her mother noticed how Tammi would practice until her voice was hoarse, not from obligation but desperation. As if singing was the only way she could prove her worth to a world that felt perpetually ready to abandon her. The perfectionism that would both elevate and torment her throughout her career manifested early. She would spend hours practicing scales and breathing exercises she had taught herself, studying the vocal techniques of gospel legends like Mahalia Jackson and Clara Ward with the intensity of a scholar. By age 8, she could replicate vocal runs that took professional singers years to master. Yet she remained convinced that she wasn't good enough, that one wrong note might cause the magic to disappear forever. The transformation from church prodigy to professional artist began when she was just 11. Discovered at a local talent show by Luther Dixon, a scout whose ear for raw talent had launched careers across Philadelphia. Dixon had attended the show reluctantly, accompanying a friend who insisted he needed to hear something special. He would describe that moment for decades. "I heard this voice from the parking lot and thought someone had left the radio playing Mahalia Jackson. When I walked inside and saw this slip of a girl commanding that stage like she owned the world, I knew I was witnessing lightning in a bottle." Within months, Tammi was in professional recording studios, her voice maturing with supernatural speed that both thrilled and worried those around her. The demos from this period reveal something almost unsettling, a technical mastery and emotional depth that belonged to someone twice her age, yet retaining an innocence that made listeners feel protective even as they were awed. Producers struggled to place her in existing categories, eventually creating new ones that attempted to capture the phenomenon they were witnessing. Her parents faced an impossible choice: protect their daughter's childhood or nurture a gift that seemed too powerful to ignore. They chose compromise, allowing limited professional activities while trying to maintain some semblance of normal family life. But normalcy was already becoming impossible for a child whose voice had begun attracting attention from major labels and established performers. By 15, she had signed with Scepter Records and transformed into Tammi Terrell, a name suggested by label executives who felt it rolled off radio announcers' tongues like honey. The transformation wasn't just nominal. It represented a complete reimagining of identity that would have psychological consequences for years to come. Tammi Montgomery, the vulnerable church girl, began to disappear behind Tammi Terrell, the professional performer who seemed invincible. Her early singles showcased a voice that defied categorization, too sophisticated for teen pop, too youthful for adult contemporary, yet undeniably powerful enough to transcend any label the industry tried to place on her. Music critics struggled to describe what made her special, eventually settling on words like luminous and transcendent, adjectives typically reserved for phenomena that couldn't be fully explained. Could this early immersion into the adult world of professional music have planted the seeds of the vulnerability that would later make her susceptible to the wrong kind of love? But success came with shadows that no teenager should have to navigate. The entertainment industry of the 1960s was particularly brutal to young black women, who faced not just the usual predators that circled fresh talent, but the additional burden of representing their entire race during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. Every interview, Every performance, every public appearance carried weight that would have crushed someone less resilient. James Brown entered her life like a force of nature in 1964 when 17-year-old Tammi was still trying to establish herself as more than a novelty act. The godfather of soul was at his absolute peak. His performances were religious experiences, his influence on popular culture immeasurable, and his attention could transform unknown singers into stars overnight. When he noticed Tammi during a multi-act review in Philadelphia, his interest felt like validation from the highest echelons of the music world. Brown's patronage came with opportunities that could have taken decades to earn elsewhere. Opening slots on major tours that crisscrossed the country, recording sessions with legendary musicians whose names appeared on hit records, exposure to audiences that numbered in the tens of thousands. For a young woman from Philadelphia's modest neighborhoods, it must have felt like stepping into a fairy tale where talent was finally receiving its due reward. But Brown's attention also came with expectations that revealed themselves gradually, then all at once. His need for control extended far beyond professional guidance into personal domination that began subtly. Suggestions about clothing, hair, even speech patterns, before escalating into something darker and more dangerous. His volatile temper, legendary in the music industry, found new targets in the young women who orbited his empire. Friends from this period remember Tammi arriving at venues with unexplained bruises that she would dismiss with increasingly elaborate stories about clumsiness and accidents. Her infectious laughter became rarer, and her trademark spontaneity was replaced by careful calculation of every word and gesture, as if she was constantly bracing for criticism or worse. The confident young woman who had commanded church choirs began second-guessing herself in ways that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The psychological impact of this relationship would reverberate through the rest of her short life. James Brown represented everything that was seductive and dangerous about the music industry. The promise of stardom coupled with the reality of exploitation. The offer of protection that transformed into prison. For someone whose entire identity had become wrapped up in her ability to please audiences, finding herself trapped by someone who claimed to be helping her succeed created a cognitive dissonance that she struggled to resolve. The breaking point came when she met David Ruffin of the Temptations in 1965. David represented everything she thought she needed. He was successful enough to understand the pressures of fame, handsome enough to make her feel valued for more than just her voice, and seemed to offer refuge from the violence she had endured. Their relationship began as salvation but quickly revealed itself as another kind of prison, perhaps more devastating because it was built on genuine affection rather than mere exploitation. David Ruffin was a complex figure, blessed with one of the most distinctive voices in popular music, cursed with demons that would eventually destroy him. His struggles with addiction were already evident to those who knew him well, but to Tammi they seemed like artistic temperament rather than warning signs. She believed that love could heal whatever was broken in him, not understanding that his damage ran too deep for any individual to repair. Their relationship unfolded against the backdrop of the Temptations' greatest successes, which should have made it a fairy tale romance between two of Motown's brightest stars. Instead, it became a masterclass in how two wounded people could damage each other while believing they were providing comfort. David's need for chemical escape conflicted with Tammi's need for emotional stability, while her growing fame created jealousies that he couldn't articulate or control. The revelation that David was already married with children he rarely mentioned shattered something fundamental in Tammi's understanding of trust and love. She had invested so much hope in their relationship, seeing it as proof that she could find happiness outside the music that had defined her entire existence. Learning that she had been unknowingly playing the role of the other woman felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical violence she had endured. During this chaotic period, music remained her sanctuary. In recording studios, she could forget the bruises and broken promises, focusing instead on creating something that might outlast the pain. Her voice during this era carries an extra layer of poignancy. The sound of someone using art as both escape and expression, pouring heartbreak into melodies that would comfort others experiencing their own darkness. The move to Detroit in 1965 offered hope for a fresh start that felt like resurrection. Berry Gordy's Motown machine was transforming American culture, creating a space where Black artists could achieve mainstream success without compromising their essential identity. Joining the label felt like stepping into a family that might finally protect and nurture her talent without exploitation or hidden agendas. The Motown finishing school taught her to walk, talk, and present herself as a lady. But more importantly, it surrounded her with other artists who understood the unique pressures of their profession. For the first time since childhood, Tammi found herself in an environment where talent was respected, creativity was encouraged, and success was measured by artistic achievement rather than personal submission. Studio A on West Grand Boulevard became her second home, the place where she could breathe freely for the first time in years. The musicians, producers, and fellow artists created an atmosphere where collaboration flourished without hidden motives or ulterior agendas. For someone who had spent years walking on eggshells, the straightforward professionalism felt revolutionary. The partnership with Marvin Gaye began almost by accident in early 1967, though in retrospect it seems like destiny finally asserting itself. Marvin, already established as one of Motown's premier artists, had been searching for a duet partner who could match his sophisticated style and emotional depth. His previous collaborations had been successful but lacked the chemistry that could transform good songs into transcendent moments. When producers played him demos of Tammi's voice during a routine meeting, something clicked that surprised everyone in the room. Marvin, known for his deliberate decision-making process, reportedly stopped the playback after just 8 bars and declared, "That's her. That's the voice I've been waiting for my entire career." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. He had found his musical soulmate without even meeting her in person. Their first recording session created magic that veteran producers still discuss in hushed, reverent tones. Mickey Stevenson, who had supervised hundreds of Motown sessions, described watching them work. They didn't just sing together, they conversed in a language only they understood. When those voices blended, something alchemical happened. You could feel electricity crackling through the control room. The chemistry was immediate and transformative on multiple levels. Where Marvin's voice provided smooth sophistication that appealed to adult audiences, Tammi brought radiance that seemed to bubble up from some inexhaustible source of light, attracting younger listeners without alienating their parents. Their personalities complemented each other perfectly, his introspective nature balanced by her effervescent spirit, her vulnerability steadied by his protective instincts. But perhaps most importantly, they genuinely liked each other as people. In an industry built on artificial relationships and manufactured chemistry, their friendship was authentic in ways that couldn't be faked or forced. Marvin found in Tammi someone who could make him laugh during his darker moments, while she discovered in him a protector who valued her mind as much as her voice. Their first hit together revolutionized both their careers and established a template for romantic duets that artists still attempt to replicate 50 years later. "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" became more than a song. It became an anthem for couples who believed love could overcome any obstacle, a message that resonated particularly powerfully during the turbulent social changes of the late 1960s. Radio programmers fought for advance copies of their recordings, knowing that new Marvin and Tammi material could transform their entire programming strategy. But beyond commercial success, something deeper was happening. Two wounded souls had found in each other the missing piece that made them whole. and audiences could feel that authenticity radiating through their performances. In the studio, they would spend hours perfecting not just vocal arrangements but the emotional truth of each song, pushing each other to find deeper meaning in lyrics that might have seemed simple on paper. Other Motown artists would find excuses to hang around Studio A when they were recording, knowing they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment and approached high art. Their recording process became legendary throughout the label. They would arrive hours before scheduled sessions, working through arrangements with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Tammi would suggest subtle phrasing changes that brought out hidden emotions in Marvin's voice, while he would craft harmonies that showcased her range without overwhelming her natural sweetness. The mutual respect was palpable. Each trusted the other's instincts completely. On stage, their performances became events that transformed concerts into spiritual experiences. Audiences didn't just listen. They participated in something that felt like a celebration of human connection itself. The two would play off each other with spontaneity that made every show unique, yet their natural chemistry was so profound it seemed effortless to those watching from the audience. Friends from this period described Tammi as someone transformed by her partnership with Marvin. The woman who had spent years protecting herself from exploitation finally relaxed into collaboration based on mutual respect and genuine affection. She would tell confidants, "Every time I sing with Marvin, I feel like life is good again." For his part, Marvin saw in Tammi not just a duet partner, but a kindred spirit who understood the weight of carrying other people's dreams. Their hits came in rapid succession throughout 1967, each one showcasing not just individual talents, but their ability to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Chart positions became secondary to the emotional impact. These were songs that played at weddings and anniversaries that couples called their song, that provided soundtrack to some of life's most important moments. The success brought opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Television appearances on shows watched by millions, concert tours that took them across the country, recording sessions with the finest musicians in the industry. For someone who had known exploitation and disappointment, working with Marvin felt like finally receiving the respect and protection she had always deserved. But as their professional partnership flourished, Tammi was fighting private battles that she kept hidden from even her closest friends. The headaches began sometime in early 1967, subtle at first, just occasional discomfort that she dismissed as stress from her demanding schedule. The pain was easy to ignore when weighed against the fulfillment she felt creating music with Marvin, and the knowledge that their songs were bringing joy to millions of people. As months progressed, the headaches became more frequent and severe, sometimes striking with such intensity that she would have to excuse herself from recording sessions to vomit in private. Tammi began carrying aspirin everywhere, quietly popping pills between takes during recording sessions while maintaining the professional smile that had become her trademark. She confided in almost no one about the growing pain, terrified of appearing weak in an industry that had little patience for anything that might interfere with the business of making hits. The symptoms were subtle enough that she could convince herself they were manageable. Occasional dizziness during performances, moments of confusion when she would forget lyrics she had sung hundreds of times, brief episodes where her famous coordination would falter. Each incident could be explained away. Fatigue, stress, the natural result of a demanding career that kept her constantly traveling and performing. Marvin was among the first to notice something was seriously wrong. During their performances, he began seeing moments when Tammi's usual radiance would flicker, replaced by a look of confusion or pain that she would quickly mask with her professional smile. He started positioning himself closer during shows, ready to catch her if she stumbled, though neither of them spoke openly about what they both sensed approaching like a gathering storm. Studio engineers from this period noticed changes in Tammi's recording habits that, in retrospect, seem like obvious warning signs. She, who had always been a perfectionist, began accepting takes that weren't quite up to her usual standards, as if prolonged sessions had become physically difficult. Her voice remained beautiful, but those with trained ears detected a subtle fragility that hadn't been there before, a breathiness that suggested she was working harder to achieve the same results. The collapse at Hampton-Sydney College should have been a clarion call for immediate medical attention, but Tammi's first instinct was denial rooted in years of having to appear strong regardless of circumstances. Within hours of regaining consciousness, she was insisting she felt fine, that it was just exhaustion from their grueling tour schedule, that they could continue their planned performances without missing a beat. The ambulance ride to the local hospital became a turning point not just for Tammi but for everyone who loved her. Marvin, riding alongside her unconscious form, later described it as the moment he realized that their partnership might be more fragile than anyone had imagined. The woman who had seemed invincible on stage was suddenly vulnerable in ways that terrified him. It took combined pressure from Marvin, Motown executives, and her family to convince her to see doctors in Detroit rather than trying to continue the tour. Even then, she approached the medical appointments with the same denial that had characterized her response to the collapse, certain that whatever was wrong could be quickly fixed with rest and proper medication. The diagnosis, when it came after days of tests and consultations, shattered everyone who loved her. The brain tumor was substantial, already the size of a golf ball, located in an area controlling motor function and sensory processing. Medical specialists explained it had likely been growing for months, possibly years, gradually increasing pressure inside her skull and causing the headaches that had become her constant silent companion. Dr. Keith Black, the neurosurgeon who would oversee her care, later described the case as one of the most challenging he had encountered. The tumor's location made surgical removal extremely risky, with significant chances of damaging areas that controlled speech, motor function, and personality. Yet without intervention, the growth would continue until it proved fatal, possibly within months. What followed was a medical odyssey that would test every ounce of Tammi's legendary strength and redefine everyone's understanding of courage. The first surgery, performed at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, lasted 8 hours as surgeons worked to remove as much of the mass as possible without damaging surrounding brain tissue. The recovery was agonizing, weeks of nausea, disorientation, and pain that no medication seemed able to fully control. The surgery was followed by radiation treatments that left her nauseated and weak, her body struggling to process the targeted beams designed to kill remaining cancer cells. Her famous hair fell out in clumps, and the vibrant energy that had made her such a dynamic performer was replaced by fragility that broke the hearts of everyone who witnessed her struggle to maintain optimism in the face of devastating circumstances. But perhaps most devastating was watching the illness attack her voice, the instrument that had defined her existence since childhood. The tumor's location affected neural pathways that controlled fine motor movements, including those required for the precise breath control and vocal coordination that had made her singing so distinctive. Sometimes she would stand before the microphone and only whispers would emerge, and the frustration and terror in her eyes were almost unbearable for those who loved her. Marvin became her constant companion during this period, rearranging his entire life around her medical schedule in ways that demonstrated the depth of their friendship. He visited between his own recording sessions, spent countless hours at her bedside reading to her when she was too weak to talk, and gradually took on the role of protector that she had needed for so long but never found in her romantic relationships. Their friendship deepened during these months beyond professional collaboration into something approaching the bond between siblings. Marvin would later describe this period as both the most difficult and most meaningful of his life, watching someone he loved struggle against an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, bargained with, or fought in any conventional way. Despite her condition, Tammi insisted on recording whenever physically possible, determined to leave behind as much music as her failing body would allow. Some of their final duets were captured with Tammi so weak she needed assistance standing, requiring frequent breaks and multiple takes to capture the moments when her voice was strongest. The irony was heartbreaking. As her physical condition deteriorated, the emotional power of her performances seemed to intensify, as if illness was stripping away everything artificial to reveal the pure essence of her gift. The second surgery came 6 months after the first, when follow-up scans revealed that the tumor was regrowing faster than doctors had hoped. This operation was even more invasive, requiring surgeons to access areas of the brain that controlled speech and memory. The recovery was longer and more difficult, leaving Tammi with coordination problems that made simple tasks like walking or holding a glass of water challenging. The surgeries continued, third, fourth, fifth, each one offering hope that quickly faded as the tumor proved resistant to every medical intervention available in 1968. Tammi's weight dropped dramatically, falling from her normal 120 pounds to barely 90, and the radiant woman who had commanded stages across America became a shadow, sustained only by determination to keep singing as long as breath remained in her body. During this period, she began speaking more openly about mortality, though always with the characteristic optimism that had defined her personality since childhood. She told friends she wasn't afraid of dying, but terrified of being forgotten, of having her music fade from memory along with her physical presence. These conversations revealed someone who had finally found peace with herself, even as her body betrayed her in the cruelest possible way. The final recording sessions were exercises in love rather than commerce, attempts to preserve every possible moment of a voice that had brought immeasurable beauty into the world. Tammi would arrive at the studio clearly in pain, sometimes needing assistance to stand. But once the music began, something of her old spirit would emerge, if only briefly. These sessions required tremendous patience from everyone involved, with frequent breaks and multiple takes to capture the moments when her voice was strongest. Marvin's devotion during this period was complete and unwavering. He canceled lucrative engagements to be present for her surgeries, spent sleepless nights at her hospital bedside, and gradually became the anchor that kept her tethered to hope when medical prognoses grew increasingly grim. Their friendship provided strength for both. She drew comfort from his presence while he found purpose in being there for someone who had given him such immeasurable joy. The 6th, 7th, and 8th surgeries followed in rapid succession as doctors grew increasingly desperate to control the tumor's aggressive growth. Each operation was more invasive than the last, requiring longer recovery periods and leaving Tammi weaker than before. By early 1970, it had become clear that medical options were exhausted and that the tumor had proven resistant to every intervention that medical science could offer. As 1969 became 1970, Tammi's condition deteriorated rapidly. She began having difficulty walking without assistance, and speaking became increasingly challenging, though she continued insisting on trying to record whenever physically possible. These final sessions were acts of devotion rather than professional obligation, attempts to capture whatever remained of lightning in a bottle before it disappeared forever. The end came on March 16, 1970, at Graduate Hospital in Philadelphia, the same city where her journey had begun just 24 years earlier. Tammi had been unconscious for several days, her family and closest friends maintaining a vigil beside someone who had given them so much beauty and inspiration. Marvin was holding her hand when she took her last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for everything she had given him and the world. March 16, 1970, Graduate Hospital, Philadelphia. At just 24, Tammi Terrell's voice stopped, but her echo never did. She had been unconscious for days, family and friends maintaining vigil beside someone who had given them so much beauty. Marvin was holding her hand when she took her last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for everything she had given him and the world. Her death sent shockwaves through the music industry and devastated fans who had followed her courageous battle against a disease that had stolen so much from someone so young. Radio stations across the country interrupted regular programming to announce her passing, and many began marathon tributes featuring her recordings with Marvin that reminded listeners of what the world had lost. But perhaps no one was more affected than Marvin Gaye himself, who lost not just a duet partner but his closest friend and musical soulmate. Those who knew him said something fundamental died along with Tammi, and his music would never again carry the pure radiance that had characterized their collaborations. The man who had once been known primarily as a romantic crooner began his transformation into the socially conscious artist who would create What's Going On. The funeral at New Jerusalem Baptist Church, where she had first discovered her gift as a child, brought together Motown royalty, industry executives, and hundreds of fans who came to pay their respects. The service was both celebration and mourning, recognition of a life that had touched millions despite its brevity. Marvin sang at the service, his voice breaking with emotion as he performed the Lord's Prayer. But it would be years before he could sing their duets without being overwhelmed by grief. In the immediate aftermath of her death, tributes poured in from around the world, celebrating not just her musical talent but her courage in facing devastating illness with grace and dignity. Fellow artists spoke of her professionalism, her kindness, and her ability to find joy even in the darkest circumstances. Radio stations programmed marathon dedications to her music, and many of her songs climbed the charts again as people rediscovered the beauty she had created. But the most lasting tribute came from Marvin himself, who channeled his grief into a creative renaissance that would produce some of the most important music in American history. The introspective, socially conscious albums that followed Tammi's death bore little resemblance to the joyful duets they had created together, but they carried the emotional depth that their friendship had taught him to access. What's Going On? Let's Get It On, and I Want You all bore the influence of his time with Tammi, proving that her impact extended far beyond their recorded collaborations. The impact of her death extended far beyond individual loss to mark a turning point in Motown's evolution. Her passing represented the end of the label's age of innocence, the moment when Berry Gordy's Dream Factory had to confront the reality that not all stories had happy endings. Her case became a catalyst for improved healthcare provisions for Motown artists and greater attention to the physical and mental well-being of performers. The Tammi Terrell Foundation, established by her family and Motown Records in the months following her death, began funding brain tumor research that has contributed to treatments saving thousands of lives over the subsequent decades. The foundation also provides support for young artists facing serious illnesses, ensuring that her legacy extends beyond music into areas that might prevent other families from experiencing the kind of devastating loss that had affected everyone who loved her. Record executives began recognizing they had witnessed something unprecedented in Tammi's career, an artist who had achieved perfect authenticity, whose recordings captured not just vocal performance but emotional truth that transcended the artificial boundaries the industry typically imposed. Her albums were reissued regularly, introducing new generations to a voice that seemed to grow more relevant with each passing year rather than fading into historical curiosity. Critics and historians began to understand that Tammi represented something unique in popular music history, a performer who had managed to maintain her essential humanity despite the pressures of fame and success. Her recordings revealed an artist who had used her pain as raw material for beauty, transforming personal struggle into universal communication that transcended racial, cultural, and generational boundaries. The duets with Marvin were increasingly recognized as among the finest examples of vocal collaboration in recorded music history. Their chemistry had produced songs that seemed to capture the very essence of human connection, celebrating love in all its forms while acknowledging the fragility that makes it precious. Music scholars began studying their recordings as masterclasses in communication, noting how each artist brought out qualities in the other that neither could access alone. Modern streaming platforms have introduced Tammi to digital natives who discover her through algorithms designed to find timeless quality rather than contemporary relevance. These young listeners, unburdened by the historical context that shaped her era, respond to her voice with the same immediacy that captivated audiences 50 years earlier, proving that genuine artistry transcends generational boundaries and technological changes. The relationship between Tammi and Marvin has taken on almost mythic proportions in popular culture, becoming a symbol of artistic collaboration that transcended professional partnership to become genuine friendship. Their story reminds us that the best art often emerges from the deepest human connections, and that creativity flourishes when artists trust each other completely rather than competing for individual recognition. Educational institutions now incorporate Tammi's story into curricula about American music history, using her career as an example of how individual artists can embody larger cultural movements while maintaining their unique identities. Her life has become a case study in both the possibilities and perils of early success in the entertainment industry, particularly for young women of color navigating an industry that often viewed them as commodities rather than artists. In recording studios worldwide, engineers still use Tammi's vocals as reference points for capturing emotional performance that serves the song, rather than showcasing technical ability. Her recordings demonstrate how subtle changes in tone and phrasing can convey complex emotions, and her approach has influenced generations of singers who understand that authentic emotion trumps vocal gymnastics every time. The ongoing popularity of her music on streaming platforms proves that authentic emotion, honestly expressed, can transform 3 minutes of melody into an eternity of human connection. In a world that often values image over substance and manufactured controversy over genuine artistry, her legacy stands as proof that the purest art comes from the truest hearts, and that sometimes the brightest lights burn out fastest because they burn so completely. Contemporary artists continue to cite Tammi as an influence, drawn not just to her vocal technique but to the authenticity that made her performances so compelling. Her ability to convey joy and pain with equal conviction has become a standard that singers still aspire to reach, and her recordings remain staples of radio programming that introduces her to audiences born long after her death. Modern medical advances in brain tumor treatment often reference Tammi's case as an example of how far the field has progressed since 1970. The research funded by her foundation has contributed to treatments that have saved thousands of lives, ensuring that her death was not without meaning beyond the artistic legacy she left behind. Neurosurgeons studying her medical records have gained insights that inform current treatment protocols. The influence of her death on Marvin Gaye's subsequent work continued to reverberate through every album he released for the remainder of his career. Music historians note how his later works carried an emotional weight that seemed directly connected to his grief over losing her, suggesting that her greatest contribution to music might have been the way she changed him as an artist and opened emotional territories he might never have explored otherwise. Tammi Terrell didn't live long enough to see the future she sang about with such conviction and hope, but every time her voice rises in those timeless duets, we are reminded that true harmony can outlast heartbreak, that authentic joy can echo longer than the lives that created it, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages. In just 24 years, She proved that immortality isn't measured in decades, but in the depth of impact one voice can have on the human heart. Was her brief life a tragedy cut short by cruel fate, or a triumph that burned so brightly it could light the way for generations of artists who followed? In our age of manufactured celebrity and digital fame, what can we learn from an artist who understood that lasting impact comes not from trying to capture every moment, but from making the moments we do capture so honest and beautiful that they become eternal? Were these final recordings acts of surrender to inevitable fate, or courageous acts of artistic preservation that ensured her voice would never truly be silenced?